please find and read Managerial Accounting Example 2D. This example helps us to calculate multiple product break-even using two different approaches. One approach is to use the overall contribution margin ratio. The other approach is to use the weighted average contribution margin per unit. Now, if we are in a setting where we have a lot of different products and those products have vastly different contribution margins, it might not make sense to think about our sales activity on a unit by unit or product by product basis. It may just make sense to think about dollars of revenue. An example of this would be a company like Menards, the home improvement retailer. You can go to Menards and you can buy a handful of screws or hardware for a few dollars. You can buy a lawnmower for $100 or hundreds of dollars. You can buy all the material to build a complete house for $40,000 or $50,000, and it's delivered to your lot with some assembly required. What does it mean to sell a unit at a place like Menards? It doesn't really mean a whole lot because their units vary so greatly. So at a company like that, thinking about units of individual product doesn't make a ton of sense. So that's a situation where using the overall CM ratio is probably a more useful way to understand our cost volume profit analysis. So let's take a look at this example. Now, this is an example of a company where we only have 3 products, and so it's not terribly difficult to think about individual units of product, but we'll use this company to explain both concepts. So the first thing we're asked to do is to determine the contribution per unit of each product, the overall CM ratio, given the sales mix in the table, and then the overall revenue required to break even. So I'll just copy and paste the data into the table here, and I'll answer question 1 by simply subtracting the variable cost from the selling price. And for our single product, the CM per unit is $150. For the double product, it's $180. For the extended product, it's $200. So that's requirement 1. Requirement 2, what is the company's overall CM ratio given the sales mix shown in the table? Now what we're asked to do is find the CM ratio, or the contribution margin as a percent of revenue. Now if we only had one product, we'd simply divide the CM per unit by the selling price per unit and get the CM ratio. All of these products have different CM ratios. And I'll demonstrate that by taking the contribution per unit divided by the selling price. And we see that the contribution margin of the single product is 43%, the double product is 30%, and the extended product is 27%. So for these 3 products, since they all have different CM ratios, it doesn't really make sense to take any one of those as the overall CM of the company, or the CM ratio of the company. What we need to do is recognize that these different CM ratios happen in different proportions because we have different unit sales of each product. So in order to figure out the company's overall CM ratio, what we need to do is figure out how many units of each product are sold, what the overall CM generated is, and come up with the company's overall CM ratio. So what we'll do is we'll calculate the total sales of each product, multiply the number of units sold by the selling price per unit, and so this is our total sales revenue for each of our 3 products. And we'll do the same thing with variable cost. Take the number of units sold times the variable cost per unit, and we have the variable cost for each of these, and then we can easily calculate the contribution margin by subtracting variable cost from sales. So this is our total CM that's earned by these 3 products. And then to come up with the company-wide total, we can simply add those up. And so now we know that the overall company has sales of $1,525,000 and contribution margin of $535,000. Now, if we want to do our CM ratio, we can divide our total contribution by our total sales, and we see that our CM ratio company-wide is 35%, which is about in the middle of our 3 individual product CMs. That's going to be the case. Your overall company CM ratio is always going to be somewhere in the middle of all your individual product CM ratios. So this is the company's overall CM ratio given the sales mix shown in the table. Thirdly, we're being asked to calculate the total revenue required to break even. Now, if you remember from your single product break-even case, in order to calculate break-even, we just take our fixed costs, add our target net operating income, which in this case is going to be 0. Our total fixed costs are given at $425,000. That's given here. And you combine those two things to get your target or required total contribution margin. So in order to earn a net profit of 0 or to break even, we need $425,000 of total contribution margin. Now, if we know that our CM ratio is 35%, approximately, we can simply divide our total fixed cost by our 35% contribution margin. And what that tells us is that in total, if the company makes $1.211 million of revenue, assuming the particular sales mix we have with our products, we'll have just enough contribution margin to cover our fixed cost and break even. And we could do the same sort of thing. We can change our target NOI from 0 to some positive number and say if we want to earn a certain amount of net operating income, how many dollars of revenue would we need to earn? So again, this kind of approach makes sense when the units that we sell are so great in number and so varied in their individual CM and selling price and variable cost that it doesn't really make sense to think about units because they're just so different from each other. And another setting where this might make sense is if you have estimated maybe a competitor's CM ratio, you've looked at their publicly traded financial statements, and you've estimated their variable cost and fixed cost, and you've estimated their overall CM ratio. That would give you a sense of how much your competitors would need to sell in order to break even. You're not always going to have unit data for your competitors, but often if they're a publicly traded company and their financial statements are publicly available, you can do some estimates at the dollar level. So that would be another setting where you want to work with the contribution margin ratio instead of unit by unit data.